very much rooting for Bitcoin and hope that it succeeds. So again, what does Bitcoin really do? People talk a lot about how Bitcoin is a currency, how you can exchange value, how if I've got a friend in Venezuela, I could send them a Bitcoin and they'll receive it in 30 minutes, which not as great as some cryptocurrency projects, but still better than remittance programs or working with banks to wire money, right? So Bitcoin is one of the first global, relatively distributed and decentralized digital currencies. It allows anyone from anywhere in the world to send Bitcoin between people without a centralized organization or service handling and managing the transaction. It's primarily used now as a store of value. Other coins have improved on the original functionality of Bitcoin. So where Bitcoin's true innovation lies is this blockchain concept, where distributed ledgers or distributed databases can create distributed systems and distributed products. And we're going to see that Bitcoin paved the way for other innovations, like the innovations that are created with Ethereum, or even the innovations that we're now seeing with IOTA, where there's no longer even a blockchain being considered. So Bitcoin was really the first mover. It brought this idea of a distributed ledger and decentralization into the consciousness of our kind of culture and our society, and it's only been propagating more projects like this. So in a very literal sense, Bitcoin is just a store of value and an exchange of value. So people are using Bitcoin really as a asset to invest in, to trade with, to supplement their own portfolios. But in a wider kind of macro lens, Bitcoin is very much the beginning of a entirely new technology that we're starting to see sweep a lot of industry and almost every compartment of our culture. So I might have just answered this, but what makes Bitcoin special? It's their first mover advantage, right? They were the first kind of global network of distributed ledgers, or of a distributed ledger. The technological breakthrough of the distributed ledger allowed the entire cryptocurrency sector to flourish, like I said earlier. It's relatively distributed, private, and trustless. So it's not as private as some currencies like Monero or Pivx. However, it does allow for some level of anonymity that there wasn't before in the kind of global financial system. I say it's relatively distributed because one of the issues, which we're going to get into later about Bitcoin, is that Bitcoin is mined by, it's really easy to buy lots of mining equipment and mine more Bitcoin than other people. So that generally can create a situation where centralization occurs. So in China, there are a couple huge mining farms, which means that they're mining the majority of the Bitcoin, which means that they ultimately have more of a say in how the protocol adapts and how it evolves in the future, which is the definition of centralization. So whereas it's not as centralized as it could be, what's special about Bitcoin is that it is this distributed, decentralized ledger that anyone can really download and participate in the network with. So the good is that it's a great store of value for your portfolio. We've seen Bitcoin rise by almost 15x this year, which I'd say is pretty great. It's not directly correlated to other markets, so you could kind of consider it as a hedge on other asset types that you're investing in your portfolio. So just because the market goes down doesn't, like the general market, like the stock market, doesn't necessarily mean the cryptocurrency market will go down. So there might even be like a little bit of an inverse correlation actually. So nobody owns Bitcoin. It's not a company. That's a really important point, and that's something that is unique to the cryptocurrency space more so than any other more so than any other, I guess, type of asset that one invests in, where you're investing in nonprofits, you're investing in individual developers, you're investing in an ecosystem. Bitcoin is not, Bitcoin doesn't really have a CEO. It's a group of loosely affiliated people that are helping support the development of Bitcoin. Now, there are some projects that are even less organized and structured than that, which some people see as good, some people see as not as good, but it really depends on your investment strategy and preference. So it's a global currency that anyone can participate in. So unlike a stock, you don't have to spend $500 to have one share. You can buy a fraction of a Bitcoin and you can send it to anyone. So in that sense, this is truly a revolution in exchanging value between two people. That removing of the middleman, if you will. So I can send a Bitcoin to my mom without MasterCard getting a portion of it, or without a bank looking at it and seeing the transaction and cataloging it. So in that sense, that really is one of the revolutionary components. What's not so great about Bitcoin is that it requires mining, which, as we kind of touched on briefly, it fosters a sense of centralization. So if you've got a lot of money, you can buy and build these huge mining farms, and then if you're mining 50% of the mining power across the world, then it can actually be a security risk for the entire project as a whole, but then it also impacts future development. So the issues we're seeing right now, all the scaling issues and all the scaling problems that we're having with the time it takes to send a Bitcoin, the transaction cost, I think it's like $15 just to send portions of a Bitcoin. So that is increasingly becoming an issue. And while people in the community want to update the protocol and they want to modernize it, because these big farms, they're called like mining farms, because they own such large portions of the mining infrastructure, they have a stake in not updating because they like the status quo because they're making too much money. So if they're not bought in, then it can cause a huge problem, and that's something that we've seen now. So again, we've seen scaling issues, high transaction fees. There's kind of tax implications of using Bitcoin like a regular currency in the US. So we don't really have the ability now to go on Amazon, buy something with Bitcoin, and then receive it a day later. While that will be done hopefully sometime in the future, one, I'd prefer not to use Bitcoin for a number of reasons, and two, any cryptocurrency, if you're trying to transact in the US on a micro level, like microtransactions, you have to deal with those as if it were a capital gains or capital loss, depending on the price of Bitcoin at the time that you sell it. So it makes things a little hairy to use it as a global digital currency yet. However, there are a lot of other countries that don't impose this tax on small purchases. So, competition. I would say that basically everyone is competing against Bitcoin. However, there are some nuances. So if you look at this list, some are competing in the sense of, building on top of the innovations that the Bitcoin blockchain created, such as Ethereum. There are some that are competing with Bitcoin strictly on the level of privacy, which we've seen with Monero. Some strictly on speed or security, I suppose, like Ripple. Some on community, and I guess you could say partnerships like Dash. Some are competing on kind of block size and transaction speed, like Litecoin and Bitcoin Cash, while others like IOTA and Railbox are competing with a completely different type of ledger, which is called which they call a DAG. So these don't even have blocks in the traditional sense that a Bitcoin blockchain does, which creates faster transactions per second and no fees. So when you talk about competition, there are so many different ways and so many different levels that people are competing at. But one thing you can say for certain is that everyone is looking at Bitcoin as a marker in terms of uh, who they're looking to take down, if you will. So charts, I'm not a big charts guy, but I mean, this is probably the most important chart you need to know for any cryptocurrency. And what this really communicates is thinking long term. If you look over here, if you look at some of these little blips where people freaked out and saw the market crashing and burning and maybe never returning to a level that it was at, looking back, in January 2014, it's a very tiny blip in the radar. So, some people are even claiming that we could see 100,000 Bitcoin, 200,000 Bitcoin. Some people are saying in the next 5 years we might see Bitcoin at $1 million per coin, which is a pretty incredible